Hello and welcome. I'm Kimberly Williams, the CEO for Absorb Software. Absorb offers its learning management system globally, and many companies leverage their LMS to advance their diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives. So a better opportunity to get our employees, our partners, our customers together to celebrate International Women's Day. The 2022 International Women's Day theme is Break the Bias. Whether deliberate or unconscious, bias can make it difficult for women to move ahead. The World Economic Forum tracks gender equity progress across 156 countries. One area that shows a large gap between men and women is economic participation. The benchmarking shows wage inequalities and limited women in leadership positions. But despite these headwinds, today's panelists have risen to the highest levels in business. What better way to help break the bias than from hearing from women who have overcome obstacles? As we hear their stories, I'm sure it will be an inspiration to all of us. To introduce these talented women, I welcome Eric Lee. Eric is a general partner and head of diversity for Welsh Carson Anderson Stowe, a leading global private equity firm. Eric, tell us about our amazing panelists.
Thank you to Kimberly, the Absorb Software team, and each of our outstanding panelists today. We are fortunate to have executives who have built incredible careers across the healthcare and technology industries. I'll briefly introduce our participants, but would encourage audience members to click the links we sent previously if you'd like to view their full biographies. Kathy Bowden-Holland is the CEO of Intoxilock, the #1 provider of ignition interlock devices that help prevent DUI offenders from driving again while under the influence. This is an absolutely vital solution to keep our streets, highways, and communities safe. Krista Ensley is the CEO of Link, a leading provider of software solutions that enable K-12 schools to best serve their students, parents, and staff. Anna Hagui joined Welsh Carson as an operating partner on our healthcare team in 2021. She also serves as a managing director of Valtruous, a Welsh Carson company that invests in and partners with entrepreneurs advancing value-based healthcare in the United States. Mia Jung joined Welsh Carson this year as our healthcare talent partner. She focuses on executive talent, strategy, and management, and helps our healthcare companies build best-in-class leadership teams. Gayatri Raman is president of the international business at Clearwater Analytics, a leading SaaS software provider of investment accounting, reporting, and analytics. Clearwater helps its clients worldwide to reduce risk, ensure compliance, and improve performance. Ann Hahn is the Chief Member Officer for the Health Management Academy, which partners with top executives from the nation's 150 largest and most innovative healthcare companies to improve the quality of healthcare across the United States. And now I will turn it back over to Kimberly to lead our terrific discussion. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Eric. So we did develop some questions for our panelists in advance, but we're taking questions from participants as well. You can put your questions into the Q&A area. And as we see a spot for them, we'll get them into the discussion as well. So to get us warmed up, we're going to do a speed round. In a quick statement, what piece of advice would you have for adults who are raising or influencing girls that might facilitate their future success in business?
I would say allow them to disagree with you. Let them stand up for themselves and be heard.
Teach them to never be afraid to ask for what they want, because you can't assume that people around you know.
You encourage them to play team sports. You don't have to be good, but you should play, because these days everything is a team sport.
I'd say tell them and show them that there are no limits, and really focus on the growth mindset, especially as they enter puberty.
I think it's important to give girls confidence to trust their instincts. Women are really taught to second guess themselves. They look to others for reassurance and guidance. And so that's really counterproductive if they can't trust their own instincts.
I'm a huge fan of a morning mantra to build that narrative. My daughter's is, I am strong, I am smart, I work hard, and I do my best every day.
Awesome. Well, I think we would probably all agree that we had a number of people that helped us, whether they're parents, grandparents, coaches, teachers, to be the women that we are today and the success that we had. Gayatri, can you talk a little bit about some of the people that influenced you and the importance of being that role model or that person that helps young girls today?
Thanks, Kimberly. So it was, for me, it was most definitively my parents. And just as a bit of background, I grew up in India in a fairly conservative Indian family, very progressive, but still there were like norms that needed to be followed. So my parents believed strongly in education, but they also believed that as women or girls, we have to learn how to run a house. So I was taught to cook, clean, do arts and all of that fun stuff. Now, how it's helped me in life is it's just taught me how to balance different aspects of my life. So I am not phased if I have to do a board meeting and a 7-year-old's birthday party at the same time, because it was just what I grew up with. And trust me, there have been enough occasions of having done that with 3 boys, right? So I just think it was an essential skill. I hated it at that time, of course, because none of my friends had to do it, but I just feel like it's helped me in life. The second, and there's just one more point, was growing up, we moved a fair bit, right? So I had to move across different locations, make new friends, learn new languages, and it seemed a bit of a chore. But my parents always taught us to treat it as an adventure. So it was always like, what new place are we going to go to? What are we going to explore? And I think it's almost now become a habit for us. So in the last, I would say, 18, 20 years of my career, I moved from India to Australia to New York, Austria, California, and now London. Actually, quite a few of these moves have been with Welsh Carson. But I feel that it builds resilience. It teaches you to make friendships, learn different cultures. It teaches you to seize opportunities, right? Now, the only thing I would say is I don't know if our kids have imbibed that or not, but we'll know in the next 15, 20 years how either they're going to be on a couch somewhere talking to somebody saying, our parents really messed us up, or they're going to just have new adventures, right? Who knows?
I definitely think that's a fear I know I had as a mother, a working mother. Are my children going to grow up to be normal? Will they regret the fact that I didn't attend every school party, school field trip, etc.? And I think one of the biggest reliefs in my life is seeing the success that my daughter now has in her career. It's, while I wasn't a perfect mother, I realized it was just fine to have that balance and maybe not do all the things that maybe some mothers do. So I understand that concern about having them lay on a couch later in life, Beatrice. Kathy, I know that you have a number of young women that seek you out for mentorship. Can you talk a little bit about what kind of advice that you give them to manage their career, to become a future leader?
So I would lay it out in a couple of different ways. First and foremost, I think for everyone, you can't become someone else. So you need to be yourself. You can read a lot of books and you can learn a lot from mentors, but trying to be something that you're not is ultimately really hard to do in the long run, and is probably going to be seen as insincere by the folks that you're leading over time. Second thing is recognize your leadership shows up all the time. Formal and informal interactions all build your reputation as a leader, which is all the more reason to be yourself. But people are watching, and you have an opportunity to be really influential in some very small moments. And then I think the last thing is I think the best leaders are those who really create followership, meaning people want to follow them. And the reason they want to follow them is because as a leader, you're invested in the folks around you. Leaders that take risk in helping their folks take risk, and then also catch them when they maybe are less successful. I don't want to say they failed, but they've learned lessons, but they dust them off and push them back out there are, I think, the best leaders, is the ones I always wanted to follow. And then you got to do for your team what you would want others to do for you, which sometimes means having your best people and pushing them to go take on other things and leave your team in the process, which can be its own challenge, but I think is how you create that followership in the long run. So it's really to be, I'd suggest to new leaders in particular, to just be thoughtful about how you go about it, and then know that you're never going to be perfect. So dust yourself back up and head back out there again.
Great advice. I'm sure none of us were perfect. None of us are now perfect. So, we talk a lot about, how to raise girls and make them strong and how to develop women as leaders. But having men who are supportive of us in the workplace is also incredibly important. I think many of us have a story about how it was a man who actually gave us a shot. And so advice to people who today are raising boys or influencing boys so that they can be the kind of colleague that supports women, that works well with women. So another fast money round here.
I'll take a second more on the fast money because I have 3 boys. So this is super personal for me. But the best advice I can give is I talk to my kids. I talk to my sons about how bias impacts me, and that makes it real for them. And that has an impact.
So my advice would be just show them. Role model respect and equality for the women around you and in your life every single day, because they're going to pick up on that and understand how they need to treat people.
My advice is specific for the world I'm in right now, which is with middle schoolers and teenagers, which means, well, I want to be a good role model. I point them to other people because that seems to make a better impression or a different impression. And so I really try and talk about my peers, my colleagues, and other women that they know and what they're doing, and use them to model that success.
My favorite tactic with boys, and my kids are 9 and 11. So this is the headspace I'm in, is the 9 and 11-year-old boy. But when they say things that are sort of rooted in gender bias, I like to just point out examples and actual data of why they're wrong. So my favorite is, boys are better than girls at sports. And I love the U.S. women's national soccer team for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's really important to create self-awareness of male privilege, and especially if your son looks like mine, white male privilege. So I think boys need to understand from a really early age how to recognize bias so they can be confident calling it out and supporting others. Even though my son's only 4.5, there's active dialogue, like many of the other women have described, about just making sure that we're not letting certain comments fall by the wayside and we're taking action early.
I share Anna's age as a 9 and 11-year-old, a girl and a boy. And so I have a son as well. So I really like to educate him on historic inequities via stories of women who rose up. And so I bought my daughter the book called Rebel Girls book series, and I make sure that he listens in when we're talking to them, when I'm reading to my daughter. And I just think it's important to help our boys understand how to play a part in closing that gap by being inclusive, seeking, supporting, and promoting different perspectives.
I think those are all really wonderful. Your children are lucky because they have a role model right in their own house that is exhibiting, what it's like to be a strong female leader. I think that when you don't have that in your house, it's important to seek it out and make sure that your children get exposure. As Kathy said, sometimes it works better as they get to be teenagers anyway. They don't necessarily think that their parents are the be all end all. So I think making sure that they've got those role models outside the house, if they're not getting it in the house, is super important. Anna, we talked a little bit about how men are often the ones that have given us a break, right? Have given us a shot at something. You want to tell a story about how that happened with you and I think helped you be a better leader?
Yeah, for sure. And it's a good segue because I do think, especially for me, growing up in finance, I've been the only woman in a lot of rooms, and in particular in boardrooms early on in my career, and still to this day, although it is starting to change, which is great. And when you're the only, that can come with a lot of weight and a lot of anxiety that you're, trying to represent or, carry the entire half of our population into that boardroom. And so I had to just get comfortable that I am just one person, the same as all the men around the table, sharing one person's perspective, and needed to get there in order to be free and myself and really just be a participant. And then through that, really got comfortable with the fact that, I only needed to interact with the people who really wanted me there. I chose not to take it personally when people ignored me or treated me in a weird way. And my orientation was always just to feel sorry for them that, they were missing out on knowing me and getting my input. And I'll say, so the story that I like to share on this topic, especially with young women that are entering the boardroom, is that I had the benefit of being in a great boardroom very early on in my career that was chaired by Tom Scully, who's one of the general partners at Welsh Carson. And as a young investment professional walking into that room, incredibly intimidating. And he is somebody that, as the chair of a board, goes around the room and solicits input from every single person around the table and listens to that in a really authentic way. And so being part of a board that was chaired by someone who, in my opinion, was extremely, knew so much more than me, but still took the opportunity to go around and include me in that process, just set a bar for all the other boardrooms that I've been in since. And so, when you're in a situation where you are sort of twice somebody's age and have a lot more experience, think about what you can do to draw that person out and get them to contribute in a meaningful way, because that really does set a tone and a bar for then all the rooms I've been in since.
Tom was really happy until you said he was twice your age, and then all of a
Well,
sudden,
some of the other guys were not Tom.
Krista, when you think about maybe specific roadblocks that you faced as a female that maybe a male hasn't had to face, what were they, and then how did you overcome them?
So I think just like a lot of the wonderful women sitting around this table, we've all faced unconscious bias. And I think we've actually faced conscious bias in some cases. Growing up in technology, starting in manufacturing and distribution and private equity over the last 10 years, these are typically dominated by men and typically older men. Going back to Anna's comment about being twice our age sometimes, it's really human nature to identify with what you know. And I think that's where a lot of the unconscious bias comes from. It's from being familiar. And I've found when women do things differently, we seem to be more communicative. We seem to be more collaborative. There are a lot of these things that manifest throughout my organization. And one specific story is I ran a company called Abilla. We were a best company to work for in Texas 5 years in a row, something I was incredibly proud of. There's a lot of stiff competition in Texas. And one of my PE backers, one of my board members said, "Oh, Krista, isn't it really nice? You run like this really nice business that people are really like to come to." And what he had completely missed, having no other female CEOs, is that a nice business pays dividends. To have a place where the best and the brightest want to come grow their careers, want to come work with you, and want to spend the majority of their time is the best thing that you can do in a business. And as a CEO, I commonly see my most important role is facilitating a place that people want to be and they want to grow. And how do you overcome these? I think Kathy had some really good points earlier. It's about being authentically you. It's about doing what works for you. It's about continuing to be consistent and not giving in to things that potentially don't work for you or are not authentic to you. And now at this point in my career, 10 years after that, I really have this empowerment that I literally can just be authentically me. And I know now I can be successful being authentically me. And I think that's how we get past these things.
I think that's a great point. I mean, I think all of the research would show that people who can show up as their true self at work have a psychological safety that enables them to do their best work. So whether it's, you're a different religion than most people at work, or a different race, or a different gender, different sexual orientation, being able to have an environment where people can show up as their authentic self is truly valuable in terms of them delivering their best work back to the company. So I think it's a really important point. Okay, we're going to do another speed round. Eric, we've had a request that you participate in this. So you can go at the end and draw from your experiences, maybe from a different lens that might be helpful in some of these. If, obviously as a woman, it might be hard, to totally relate to that. But, being a person of color, you might have a different perspective or one that would be important as well. So what piece of advice do you have for managers in the workplace to help create a culture that women feel included and valued?
So I think we just need to amplify women's voices, right? Back them up in meetings. Success is as much about confidence as about, just pure competence.
I have to echo that. Always make sure women have an equal seat at the table. I can't say how many times I've walked in and a woman that has a strong voice sits in the corner or in the back, and always invite them to that table.
Okay, so I'm third, and the first two people took my first two, so I'm going to go with my third.
I'm going to say ditto, Kathy.
I'm just going to say, be very explicit with your team about the culture you want to create. And like many things in a company, you have to say it again, and keep going. But that explicit level of communication, I think, is incredibly important.
Krista took mine in her very well said response prior, but I'm going to repeat it just because I think it's so important, which is create a place where people are encouraged to bring their authentic self to work. And I think that's going to pay dividends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we definitely have a theme going, so maybe it's an iteration on it too, and it dovetails a little bit off of what Anna shared in her story. But I think you also need to just create different spaces for those that might be less confident in speaking up, so they have a place for input. So while important to elevate women's voices at the table, if you know that there's a strong leader but may not feel as confident in certain scenarios, how are you finding other ways to amplify their voice, get feedback one-on-one, having them share that in more of a prepared format that might be more comfortable for them?
And I'll go back to something that Krista had talked about. I think it's important as a leader to help educate the entire organization on the importance of diversity and inclusion as part of the business strategy. It's a candidates market right now. It's super competitive, and it's a differentiator to have D&I as part of your organization, part of your culture.
I would just add quickly, we try to practice this at the firm every day by creating, as Anne described, different forums, on deal teams and smaller groups and in bigger forums where all team members are frankly encouraged to share their opinion and ask for their opinion. And so I think giving an opportunity for folks to participate in that way proactively is really important. And then the second part, which I think is the most important part of it, is people need to listen, right? So I think the senior team members really need to listen if they're asking for female or other younger team members to participate and really give them a chance to be heard. So thank you.
So, Anne, when you think about maybe one or two formative experiences that helped to shape your career choices or your leadership styles, what would you reference?
Sure. So I can definitely think of one experience really early in my career. So early 20s, when I was doing a hospital consulting, largely focused on improving operational efficiency in the operating room and the emergency department. And a big part of my job at that point in time was working directly with surgeons and talking about how we might change their block schedule. So if you know anything about surgeons, you can imagine I was not a very popular person typically walking into their space. Block schedules impact their OR time, their clinic time, and really their general life schedule. And I remember a particular difficult or challenging client I had with a very outspoken chair of surgery, and he had invited me to present ideas somewhat tongue-in-cheek, because I know he knew that most of the group would not agree with my recommendations, but in front of a room full of surgeons. So most of them, as you can imagine, definitely older than me, more accomplished, at least professionally, a lot of them predominantly male. And so I remember preparing for this and feeling particularly anxious about that presentation and spent time with my boss at the time. And she reminded me of something that I've really carried with me throughout my career. And that was the fact that even though I was young, so I think at that point, I think I was maybe barely 24, while I hadn't been to medical school, I certainly wasn't a surgeon. At that point, I actually was, for all intents and purposes, an expert on OR efficiency and block schedule management, because I'd spent the last 2 years learning about it and doing consulting work on it. And therein really lied my strength. So as long as I focused on what I had to offer the group and where I did have expertise, I should feel confident in the value that I can provide. And that's something that's really stuck with me. So as I went through different stages of my career, so managing senior people that had many more years of experience than me, but were coming onto a team where I had something to offer about a particular part of the business or a particular product. When I left healthcare for a period of time to work in higher education with those that had PhDs and had spent 15 years in that terrain, what expertise could I provide? And then today, working directly with C-suite executives from the largest health systems across the United States. I think it's just important for us to constantly remind ourselves of what we have that's of value. I know so many women, myself included, constantly struggle with that imposter syndrome that we face constantly. And so that's something I've always had to fight against. So coming back to this specific tactic, a way to reground myself when those feelings of doubt creep in and start to feel like I'm not worthy or I don't belong, just making sure I remind myself of where I am an expert.
And call your best friend. Yeah.
Yes.
That helps too.
Yeah, we'll get to that later.
Mia, you spent most of your career in talent acquisition, talent management. When you think about it from your perspective, you've seen a lot of different organizations. What's really worked to increase inclusion in organizations, and what hasn't worked?
I think what I've seen really work, that I've personally seen is just being incredibly intentional in your efforts in building a deep and diverse network. The value of being intentional has really been crystallized for me through a nonprofit that I co-founded about 8 years ago called Break Into the Boardroom. When I realized the lack of diversity in privately held boards and knew, where I sat in the market as an executive recruiter, I could help influence the decision makers. And as an executive search partner, I had my arms around the supply side of the equation because it's a supply and a demand side. And I was fortunate to be speaking to the demand side, which are the investors on a daily basis. And we joined forces with private equity firms that believed in diversity, like Welsh Carson, who was a leader from the beginning and a pioneer. And we helped to identify, cultivate relationships with executive women. We educated we still do this, about 40 women a year on private equity board governance, how to network, how do you get access, how do you identify your superpower, to Anne's story, what is it about your experience that can add value around a boardroom? And we just placed our 57th women in the boardroom last year, which is super exciting because we could help connect the dots from the supply side to the demand side. And that really, for me, realized that, it crystallized being intentional and building a diverse network, showing the investors and boards the breadth of diverse candidates, really demonstrates a deep bench versus a limited pool of, 1 or 2 diverse candidates. And as I mentioned, Welsh was the first private equity firm that really committed to this initiative. Brian Regan was incredible in terms of really embracing what Break Into the Boardroom was. And we placed a lot of women into the portfolio as a result. And that's where I'm here today, because I saw the commitment with Eric leading the way on the D&I efforts. And if you look at the face of Welsh Carson and the portfolio companies and in the operating partners and investors, they're really committed to it. So I think it's being intentional, being proactive about building the network. And what I haven't seen work is really treating it like a Band-Aid, trying to fill a seat. And starting with, I need diversity, but not talking about what about their backgrounds, what about their superpowers will add value at the table. Because no one wants to sit in a room because because of their gender or because of the color of their skin. They want to know what is it about their experience that can add value. So that's been my experience.
Yeah, that's great insight. Gayatri, I'm going to have you take this question that was brought through the Q&A channel because you have a few different things that you're managing. You're often in a different country, you're a woman, and you're a person of color. And so you kind of have 3 things where you might be managing people who are really different than you. So how do you attract, inspire, and motivate others who might be different from you? And how do you get them to follow you?
Thanks, Kimberly. First of all, I really, really welcome diversity, right? Whether it's diversity in gender, diversity in thought, diversity in age, right? So more and more, I've been looking at younger people, and bringing them into organizations, taking them onto roles which they feel they're not quite ready for. But really, it's all about communication. Now, the communication differs based on who you're speaking to, right? But the general ethos is open communication, talk to them about the vision, also help them through some of the things that might be going on in their mind. For example, someone goes and says, but how on earth am I going to be doing this because I have a family? And then we have a conversation, well, what does that mean, right? How can you think about it? So I feel it's very tailored depending on who you're trying to attract and what challenges they have. But generally, like showing people the vision, being open, And being very intentional about it, I think is worked for me in the past.
Great. All right, we have another question, Anna. I'm gonna pick on you because I was thinking of like Krista's way too outgoing for this question, and Mia might be too. So this one, probably more like me or you, Anna, on this one. But if you've got more of a quiet leadership style as opposed to something that's like bigger than life, charismatic, even a little bit arrogant. So you're kind of more of a collaborative person, an empathetic leader, a quieter leader. What advice do you have for somebody to keep moving up in their career, despite the fact that potentially the style is different than what we historically as a culture have rewarded?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think, I am shy, but never been accused of being quiet. So I definitely can relate on certain elements. But I think at the end of the day, it really comes down to having leaders within an organization have more empathy and self-awareness of the differences that people bring to an organization. I actually had a colleague who was quite quiet at my last firm, and he actually he was a man and shared the book Quiet, and it was actually really good for me to just spend some time with that and think about what it might feel like to be an introvert in an investment field where you're kind of always networking and trying to move quick and think out loud and talk fast. And so I think as leaders, it's really important to be aware of people's different styles and approaches. Do your best to try to create empathy of what it might feel like for that person in the culture that you've built in the industry that you're in. And then someone mentioned it earlier, but create forums and mechanisms for those types of people to succeed and thrive. And learn from them, like understand where that approach is actually better and where you can deploy that skill set and that sort of orientation in a productive way for your company.
Great. Yeah, it's a lot of research about the fact that we often promote leaders who display confidence versus competence. I think somebody might have referenced it earlier. And really, there's only like a 9% overlap between confidence and competence. People overestimate in many cases how competent they really are. And so the people who do actually sometimes don't fill the gaps of the things that they need to fill because they don't recognize they have these gaps. So if you're a little bit of a quieter leader, a little bit more introspective, think of it as a positive that you actually probably have a pretty good handle on what your strengths and weaknesses are, and you know how to close those gaps and what to work on. So there's definitely advantages. I think I'm much more of a quieter leader myself. And so you just find ways, handwritten notes as opposed to big public speeches or things that may touch somebody and make them feel important as they are without necessarily like having to be that bigger than life charismatic leader. Okay, we're going to switch gears because there's actually a question that came up about this anyway. So what advice do you have for women who want to both have a career and a family? And I know we all have children on this call, so pretty good group to weigh in on that.
I would say find a super supportive partner. It worked for me. And this is my advice to a lot of the young women out there. It takes two people to navigate dual careers. So find someone who's supportive of you and your ambitions.
I could not agree more, but I want to also share that never be afraid to step back if that's what you need. Your career will be there. The world needs smart, amazing people. I stepped back for 4 years with my first daughter and was still a CEO in my early 40s. Don't be scared to take what you need.
I was going to say that really, if this is important to you, prioritize it. Don't wait for the perfect time because it doesn't actually ever arrive.
Mine is just do it. And if the place that you're at is not going to allow you to do it, find somewhere else where you can do it.
Mm-hmm. I don't think you should ever be afraid to ask for help. There's like no way, even with a super supportive partner, which I think a lot of us are really lucky to have, you still cannot do it on your own and your partner cannot do it on their own. So like ask for all the help and then ask for more help, and like, do not be ashamed. It is not a failure. It is actually a sign of success.
Totally agree. Mine is to build your own village, build your own personal board of directors, whether that's your working mom friends, your stay-at-home mom friends, your caretakers. You need to have a village around you to really make this work.
That's all great advice. It reminds me of a story. Well, you guys don't indulge me on this, but my mom went back to work when I was probably 8 or 9 years old. It was really highly unusual at the time that a woman would go back to work. And my dad pulled together a list of all of the household chores. So all the cleaning, the laundry, the meal making the shopping list, and he assigned it all out. And so now here, an 8-year-old kid, I was making dinner for the family, and clearly I'm not a good cook now. So Lord knows how they ate my food when I was 8 years old, but it stuck with me that he made that attempt to, how do we kind of break this up so we can all be supportive of your mom taking the step. And my mom claims it didn't work very well, that she still did the bulk of the work, but it stuck in my head, at least there was an effort made at some point. So I thought that was always a cute thing that my dad did.
I hope she's on, Kimberly, and she hears this.
Yes. Well, she was her own inspiration, because she was just kind of a trendsetter, right? And set that, role model for me, that it was really cool to be a woman leader and you could do it. So I learned from both of them. It was pretty awesome. Okay. Anna, when you think about kind of how do you manage that time with your family, and also your business, pursuits and so forth, how do you make it work?
Yeah. And I not surprisingly feel really strongly that A, you can make it work, and B, it's really important for our society to figure out how to make it work for more women. And some of this comes from just a foundational belief that well-rounded people broadly, men and women who have hobbies and things they're passionate about and care about, whether it's families or pets or otherwise, make them better business people, because it gives them content upon which to relate to customers, employees, other folks that you're engaging with in the world. And so I think when you start to think about it in that regard, it's this is a priority area that's important to me as a person, and I'm going to be very explicit about what parts of it I am going to prioritize. And so it ties in a little bit to what people were saying around a supportive spouse. And Kimberly, what your dad did, quite frankly, is what I did, is just wrote down we want to eat every day, and the kids need to be bathed every now and then, and really going through that list and figuring out explicitly what you are going to do, prioritize those things, communicate those priorities to everybody that needs to know about them, and then continue to prioritize them. So make sure that you truly are putting those things above everything else in your life. And then, to Mia's point, outsource everything else. So to the extent you're privileged enough to have money to hire people to do it. Otherwise, so somebody's got to feed the kids, or you decide that that's not that important, and you find, you let go of some things too. But I think, to me, this is, again, just foundational to thriving companies that can create longevity within their employees, is embracing the pieces of people that are non-work, and whether that's families or hobbies or anything, it's really celebrating those parts of your employees.
Great. We're going to do a special speed round here that was not an advanced speed round question, but submitted by somebody. So can you share how you got to, kind of that C-suite, the role that you're in now, or the roles that you were in to get to that C-suite, and how much it was proactive, how much it was reactive, how did somebody help you? Just a little bit of that overview.
Just keeping the same order as we're doing fast questions. I think I just seized opportunities without, worrying too much about how risky was it and where was it and how would I manage everything else. Just went for it.
Awesome advice. I would say absolutely the same thing. I had great mentors. They gave me amazing opportunities. I stepped into every one of them. Something really, really key that women have to do is I always made sure people around me knew exactly where I wanted to go and what I wanted to be. And since I was a little girl, I wanted to be a CEO, and everybody knew that, and everybody helped me get there.
I'm going to say ditto on this one, Krista. I think it's really important to communicate exactly what you want to do and get the feedback on what you need to be successful in that role, and then listen to it
and take it.
Yeah.
I love that Krista and Kathy were that explicit. My path was not that. I just saw opportunities to take on more and do more in the environments that I was in, and wanted the ball and just kept grabbing it.
Yeah, and I think mine's a little bit of a mix too. So I think definitely set aspirations high and was clear about that, but the intentionality was more around like, what are the specific skills or specific thing I feel like I want to do as the next step? So people knew where the end goal was, but I was then actively seeking out like something very specific to help me get there.
Mine, I'll take from Renee da Silva, who's the CEO of Health Management Academy. She's big on the power of the nudge. And so I was nudged by a lot of great people in my life. I also, in my mind, have reframed what failure means, and failure is not trying to me. I have a huge fear of regret. And so you just got to hold your nose and jump in and try your best. And what's the worst thing that happens?
So I remember my brother said to me when he was, I don't know, he was like 20 something. He said, well, I don't really want to be a CEO, or I don't remember how it came up. And I was shocked. I'm like, what do you mean you don't? Doesn't everyone want to be a CEO? I thought it's everybody's goal, but I had no idea.
I wanted to be a gardener. So there you go. I did not want to be a CEO.
Yeah. Well, when I was about 3, my mom tells a story that I told her when I grew up, I want to be a nurse. And she explained to me that, you know, you can be a doctor, girls can be doctors, you can be whatever. And she says, my eyes got as big as saucers. And I said, then I know what I'm going to be. I'm going to be a sheriff. So there you go. All that opens up. Okay. So another speed round. What is something you wish you knew in your mid to late 20s, but didn't? Like, what if you could go back and tell yourself, when 25-year-old self something, what advice would you give your 25-year-old self?
Speak up. When you feel something's not going right, speak up. Don't just take it and, don't just think this is the way it's supposed to be. Just speak up.
Right. I would say words are important. Your public persona, your private persona, what you say and what you do, especially as a leader, people are watching and it's important.
I wish I knew the overlap between confidence and competence was 9%.
I was going to say that no matter how much wisdom or perspective you gain, you're still uncomfortable all the time when you're making hard decisions and doing hard things. So just embrace that discomfort and go for it.
Yeah. I'm just going to double down on where I started, which is the trust your instinct. I wasted so much time and left so many good ideas on the table because I second guessed or worried it was something dumb or people would laugh or it wouldn't be the right answer. And I should have just spoken up.
I'll go back to Anna's point. You got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. There's a great metaphor about lobsters and how you can't grow. The lobsters can't grow unless their shell's taken off, and they're super vulnerable during that period, but that's the only way they can grow. And that's super relevant, I think, back to the 25-year-old Mia.
Well, hopefully we all keep developing ourselves as leaders and get stronger and better all the time. If you could, talk about it, and what leadership principle do you think that you would have wished you kind of learned earlier or started to, hone earlier in your career?
Yeah, I think especially when I started to take on management roles, I wish I had understood the value earlier about seeking out the dissenting voice. I feel like maybe especially for women, and as we talked about wanting to make sure that people are validating your ideas, a lot of times as leaders, if we don't hear disagreement or pushback on an idea, we just want to move on because we assume it's a good one and everyone is with us. And often if we're not taking that moment to either in that discussion actually bring forth or call out people who we know might have a differing point of view, we're missing an opportunity for either a change in a decision, or if not, even just a nuance in the way something could be executed or enhanced or changed in a way to make it better. And maybe not in the group setting, but if you know there's maybe a differing opinion, to at least recognize it, really seeking that person out one-on-one and letting them share it, especially if you're worried that might be detrimental if they're sharing it with others without sharing it with the group. And so just taking that time and making sure that you're recognizing those ideas and you're honoring them, even if you go in a different direction.
Mia, how about you?
I'm going to just underscore what a lot of folks have already said, but it is be authentic in your own leadership style. Leadership is not a one size fits all. The more you can embrace your personality and style in a very courageous manner, I think the more your teams will embrace you. And I think as leaders, we need to admit to making mistakes. We have to show vulnerability. We have to ask questions. And to Anna's point, we got to get comfortable being uncomfortable. This is how we learn and grow. And I think great leaders show that they're human, and as a result can really connect with people, establish trust, which is key when leading a team through the highs and lows of things like we've been through over the past few years. It is a candidate's market, as I said, and being an authentic leader who cares about their people and creates a strong culture and that followership we talked about, it's a competitive differentiator and will attract and retain the best talent, which will result in strong returns. And it's good business.
Great, thank you. There's a question that came in about what advice do you have for men so they can be more or the most supportive of women in the workplace? Krista, you want to take this one?
Sure, absolutely. So as men in the workplace, it's important that they bring equality. It's important that they bring women to the discussion, kind of a lot of the things that we've talked about today. And I think it's also really important for men, and we do this a lot at my organization, to actually study what implicit and conscious bias are so they can actually recognize it. Because there's a lot of times and there's a lot of situations that I think things take place and they simply don't recognize that it does. I have this interesting example. I'm on the board of a nonprofit and we just added another board member, and she happens to be a Black female. She's very highly successful, a doctorate candidate. She owns a business, and the chairman of my board basically interviewed her and he was like, "Ooh, I think we have to be really careful when we ask for her monetary donation, because when I was talking to her, she was in an Amazon truck. I think she delivers Amazon packages." Well, she actually owns the company that delivers Amazon packages in 3 cities. And I had lunch with her, and she's sharing this incredible story and all of her success. And I said, "Sophia, I need to share with you what just happened. Oh my God." And she was like, "Krista, it happens." And so that was something I had to take back to my board and say, guys, like, white 65-year-old man doesn't mean every Black woman is out there delivering packages. She was running her business. And that was a real eye-opener for me, that is still existing. And I think it's important to every day look past that and question yourselves.
Great advice. Okay, when I'm sure we've all had something that we've faced in our past where you've experienced bias in the workplace, whether it was towards us, towards somebody else. But what did you do to address that? And how do you handle those kinds of situations where maybe you see a colleague who is, whether it's conscious or unconscious bias towards them? How do you handle that situation, or how have you handled it?
Should we go around the table, Kimberly, and talk about it?
Sure.
Okay. I think, I've always called it out, but in a gentler way, just to see what the intent was. And if the intent was questionable, then make sure you're absolutely sort of shutting that down, right? And if the intent was unconscious, then maybe sort of gently point that out and do that. And that's worked in quite a few cases.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I mean, the only way to really deal with this is to point it out, to be really direct, gentle if you need to be, but what you find in a lot of cases that people maybe didn't even recognize it or what they were doing, and just being consistent around that.
Yeah, I completely agree with the point you've both made. I think it's easier for people to hear it in a gentle and one-on-one fashion, but I also think it's extremely important in a group setting to redirect in a way that people who are paying attention understand what your intent was, right? Not to become necessarily confrontational, unless it could call for that, but I don't think it does most of the time. But I don't think you can simply hold it for later if you've got a group around you that needs to know that you saw it, you understood it, and you don't accept it.
Anybody have anything different that they want to add?
I would just jump in a little bit because I often answer this question to younger women in their careers as they enter, again, those before mentioned male dominated boardrooms, where sometimes it's not a comfortable spot to sort of be pointing it out when you're the only, and you're with people that are, chiefs and in their 60s. And you're young in your career and the only in that room. And so I kind of encourage people to come up with a line that sort of is a little bit of a, hey, like that didn't work for me. And it can be anything from like, that was odd, like share more, which essentially like get somebody to share again more of the context of where their head is as they said something, which gives people the benefit of the doubt and the chance to, again, share more of that context. But I do think to the extent you can come up with a way to engage somebody at any age, it creates sort of healthy dialogue and a learning opportunity for all the folks around the table, but also recognize it can be very hard to ask people to do that in certain rooms.
Yeah.
I don't know if Anne has something to add, but I can just tell a quick story because I agree with everything Anna said. I was one of kind of 10 managers, the only woman manager, the youngest by 10 years in one of my sales jobs. And the vice president said, I need someone to take notes and order lunch. Mia, why don't you do that? And I was like stunned. And one of my colleagues, one of my male colleagues stood up. He said, that's not appropriate. I will do that. And I just really appreciated him advocating for me and standing up in that room. It was just one of those moments that I'll never forget because I was not able to quickly articulate anything back, but I appreciated, my colleagues standing up.
Yeah, it's unfortunate how often that still happens. I would just round us out by saying that I do think it's really important your position in the room when the instance occurs. So Anna was sharing an example where it may be happening to her personally. If you're the CEO or the leader of the team or in a position of power in the room, I think how you show up and recognize it, even if you take more of the conversation offline, is important versus just being a member at the table. Both have responsibility, but your team will look to you and how you respond, and we shouldn't neglect that.
My uncle wants to know if it's okay to cry in the boardroom to get your way. Do you think he remembers me as a little child who used to cry to get my way? I don't remember that, but maybe I did. So Uncle Dave, I think we all try not to cry in the boardroom, but it may happen. I don't know if it's like a temper tantrum, but in general, it does happen. And thank you, Uncle Dave, for watching our little webinar. So, okay. Maybe a couple of you have some specific advice. I'll let you guys raise your hands if you want to take this question. How do you overcome the imposter syndrome and build confidence when you've been subjected to an environment that has always undervalued you for a long time?
I'll be happy to take that. First, I'll start with the last question. If you're in an environment that is undervalued for you for a long time, you shouldn't be in that environment. You need to leave, right? But having said that, the first half of that question around the imposter syndrome, I can't imagine that there's a person out there who hasn't experienced this, right? We've all read about it for women in particular. I got some really good advice when I had my first child, which is relevant to this, from a friend of mine. He said, look, if there's going to come a night at 2 or 3 in the morning when you think, I don't have any idea what I'm doing here, and there's a child screaming, and you just remember, none of us had any idea what we were doing at that moment either. And it was perfect. But the same is true in the workplace, right? Everyone who you watch and admire and who has been successful has been in that same place. And that, I think, is something really important to remember. I loved Anne's story about the guidance she got from a leader who said, you know this, and you need to seek out an environment where you have people who can reconfirm for you regularly that you know this, you got this. And then Mia's comment about surrounding yourself with a board of directors, a personal board of directors, who sometimes just gives you the pep talk you need to say, oh yeah, I got this. I'm going to go do it. And so, I mean, a lot of that sounds, I think, you read it in a self-help book and you hear it from on a variety of places, but I think it's true, right? No one goes through their career or their personal life on a regular basis and really believes that they've got all of it under control. It's just some are better at faking it until they make it. So just recognize that that's true of everybody around you.
Definitely true. Okay, so some questions in a related area, which are, I'd like to move up in my career. I'd like to take on bigger and higher level positions, but I don't really know how to get there and what that means and what I need to do to position myself. Do you have any advice for people, men, women, anybody really, who is starting to plan their career and how they kind of maybe chart out that career path and solicit supporters along the way? Anybody want to take that one?
I can take that one. Really, I can start. I think it's important that anybody, women, advocate for themselves, have the conversation with the manager above you or two above you saying, what do I need to do to get to this level? Just be super clear about it. I also think it's critical, and I saw this in my former job, women don't tend to take the time to network, which is really important. I mean, men do it like it's a sport and they're really good at it. And I think, for us, we've got our list of things to do and networking ends up being at the bottom. It's something that should be integrated into your daily workflow, whether it's every Friday, you put one coffee on the books, with somebody who is outside of your company. It's critical because I do think a bit of it is process of elimination. Like, let's hear about things that maybe are not resonating with you to get to what does resonate with you as in terms of next steps. But I do think advocacy is super important. Nobody's going to give you the playbook. You really need to advocate.
Anyone else have any other thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Krista.
No, go ahead, Kathy. You got it.
I was gonna echo a comment Mia has made about it. It's a talent market right now. And so if you believe that there is a role that you not only want, but should have, stick to your guns and go find it.
Absolutely. I would say be deliberate, be really clear. And whenever I mentor somebody around this area about this job or that job, my question is always, which one is going to get you closest to where you want to be in 5 years? So make sure that the moves that you're making are putting you down that path.
Great advice. We are at the top of the hour, and I thank all of you for your wonderful insights. It's inspirational to me to listen to all of you. I thank all of our participants for joining us to celebrate International Women's Day. I hope that today's sessions provided you with ideas and inspiration to raise strong girls, to support women in their career efforts, and if you're a woman yourself, to overcome those obstacles you may face in your job. So please join us on March 21st for our next Ally Chat, which will be a panel to support the United Nations International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. So until next time, remember, each of us can be an ally, and make sure that each of us makes our company better and more inclusive environment. So thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.